Have you ever gotten irritated with yourself, or looked at your kids or students and felt helpless because of something so familiar? You study first and then forget right after. You read a great book, you nod along like you understand everything, and a few days later you look back and your mind is blank. You learn vocabulary in a foreign language today, you memorize 10 words. Tomorrow you vaguely remember a few, and 2 days later it's as if you never studied at all. And then we quietly conclude something heavy. Maybe I'm not smart. Maybe my brain is weak. Maybe I just don't have talent. But the truth is much gentler. Your brain was designed to forget. Forgetting isn't a flaw, forgetting is a survival feature. If your brain stored everything it encountered every single day, it would overload. It wouldn't be able to tell what matters, what to avoid, what demands immediate action. So the brain has a strict filtering system, and that system is like a gatekeeper. The information you take in during the day, what you hear, what you see, what you read first sits in temporary processing, like the RAM of a computer. To enter long-term memory, like a hard drive, it must pass through a gate. That gate is guarded by the hippocampus. The hippocampus doesn't care what you want to remember. It asks only one question. Does this matter for survival? If the answer is yes, if it's tied to danger, pain, life or death, then it opens the door immediately. That is why a child who touches a boiling kettle once remembers it for life without anyone reminding them. The brain locks that memory in because it's linked to survival. But most of what we want to learn, languages, books, skills, doesn't create that danger feeling, doesn't scream survival, so the gatekeeper often shakes its head. And that is the deeper reason behind study today, forget tomorrow. Not because you're incapable, but because the hippocampus hasn't seen a reason to open the gate for what you're relearning to enter long-term memory. So how do we get it to open? Not by forcing it, but by speaking to it in its own language. The hippocampus responds to the language of repeated importance and survival signals. If something appears once and disappears, it labels it as passing noise. But if something keeps coming back again and again and again, it begins to suspect. Why does this keep showing up? Maybe it's actually important, and that small suspicion is enough for you to start winning. This is the reason behind the steady rain soaks the ground method. Spaced repetition. But repetition is not cramming 10 hours in one night and calling it done. It's reviewing with the right rhythm, at the right times. Because memory follows a brutal forgetting curve. After a few hours, you've already lost a large portion. After 1 day, you lose more. After 2 days, you lose even more. If you don't review, what you learned is like writing on sand. But if you review right when memory is slipping, you pull it back up, and every time you pull it up, you carve the trace a little deeper. A simple and very effective review rhythm is this. Review the first time on the second day after learning. Then review again 1 week later. Then 2 weeks after that. Then 1 month after that. Each review doesn't need to be long, just enough to remind the brain, I still need this. The sad truth is that many people study by ambush. They cram right before the exam. And yes, cramming can help you score in that moment because you're holding information in temporary storage, like opening too many tabs in a browser. But after the exam, you shut the laptop and all the tabs vanish. Space review, on the other hand, forces the brain to move data from RAM into the hard drive. You learn to use knowledge long-term, not just to survive a test. But repetition alone isn't enough, because if you repeat in boredom and pressure, memory still stays shallow. There's something in the brain like glue for memory traces. Scientists call it LTP. Long-term potentiation, a strengthening of neural connections. Simply put, the more LTP you generate, the more durable your memory becomes. The problem is LTP doesn't surge when you learn in suffering. It rises strongly when you are curious. When curiosity sparks, the brain shifts into a natural learning mode, the I want to know mode, and in that state, memories stick fast and deep. Look at children. No one has to force them to learn about the world because the world is a treasure to them. They ask nonstop, touch nonstop, explore nonstop, and they remember quickly. Adults are different. We've developed a habit of shutting memory down with a common phrase. This is so boring. It sounds harmless, but it's an off switch. Every time you say boring, you're telling your brain, this doesn't matter, and the hippocampus hears that message clearly. But if you shift just a little without forcing anything, simply by changing the question in your mind, how does this connect to my life? If I understand this, how will I see the world differently? Why do people do it this way? You'll feel curiosity returning. And when curiosity returns, learning no longer feels like dragging a stone uphill. It feels like opening a door. Even with subjects you once hated, you may discover their value. History isn't just dates, it's human nature. Literature isn't just poems, it's the language of feeling. Knowledge that seems distant can shape a wider and deeper worldview. When you learn for personal growth rather than for grades, memory improves naturally. Then there is a method that sounds strange but is deeply animal: the lion memory approach. The mammal brain becomes sharpest when it senses survival conditions nearby, hunting for food, scanning the environment, preparing to act. And you can borrow 3 gentle survival signals for studying. The first is hunger. When you're slightly hungry, the body releases signals that make the brain more alert, and memory systems become more active. That's why a great time to memorize something: vocabulary, a poem, a key idea, is before a meal. Many people do the opposite. They eat and then study. But when you're full, blood flow shifts toward digestion, your eyes get heavy, your brain wants to sleep. Studying then feels exhausting and becomes less effective. The second signal is movement. Have you noticed some people pace while reciting? Light. Swaying while walking, like being on a bus or train, can be a perfect time for memorization because the body is in a moving defined food state, a naturally focused mode. You don't need to run a marathon. Just walk a few loops around your room while reviewing and you'll be surprised how much easier it sticks. The third signal is coolness. A room that's too warm becomes a cradle for drowsiness. A slightly cool environment gives the body a gentle alertness and the brain stays clearer. Not freezing, just not overly cozy. But there is a key even stronger than hunger, movement, and cool air: emotion. Think about it: moments that shook you in life are almost impossible to forget. Your first heartbreak, your first time leaving home, your first loss, your first victory, your first deep wound. Those memories stick because the brain has the amygdala, a center tied to emotion. When strong emotion rises, the brain interprets it as "this matters," and the hippocampus is convinced, because emotion is a form of survival signal. So if you're learning a dry fact, don't learn it as an isolated number. Turn it into a story. Place yourself inside the context. Imagine what it felt like for the people within that moment. A historical year like 938 feels dull if you only repeat 938, 938, 938. But if you picture a nation under oppression, the burning resentment, the will to rise, the decisive battle, the explosion of relief when independence returns, suddenly that number carries weight. It becomes a memory, not just data. You don't need to perform. You only need to imagine it vividly enough, truthfully enough. When you do that, you're attaching knowledge to emotion, and that is how memory goes deep. And then there is a piece many people forget, even though it's the foundation: sleep. You might think sleep is when the brain rests, but it isn't. When you sleep, your body rests, but your brain organizes. The hippocampus keeps working, sorting, filtering, transferring. If you sleep too little, the hippocampus processes more hastily. It discards more because there isn't enough time. That's why reviewing a little before bed can be powerful, not a lot. Just a quick return to what matters so that during sleep the brain can stamp it into long-term memory. If you can't sleep, the worst thing isn't the lack of sleep. It's the panic about lacking sleep. The next day's exhaustion often comes from stress. And a common mistake is scrolling on your phone when you can't sleep, feeding the brain even more information and making it heavier. Sometimes if you can't sleep, simply closing your eyes and lying still without adding anything already helps the brain unload and recover. But in the long run, adequate sleep remains one of the greatest gifts you can give your memory. Do you see it? The problem was never "you're not smart." The problem is that you've been using a survival brain for academic learning without giving it a survival reason. When you review with the right rhythm, you're persuading the hippocampus that this matters because it keeps returning. When you cultivate curiosity, you generate the glue that makes memories last. When you study in favorable states, slightly hungry, gently moving, comfortably cool, you place the brain into its natural sharpness. When you attach knowledge to emotion, you unlock the deepest door of memory. And when you sleep enough, you give the brain time to turn what you learned into a part of you. The brain doesn't keep what you want. It keeps what it believes is important. So from today, instead of blaming yourself, do one thing: learn how to make what you study become important in your brain's eyes. And when you can do that, study first, forget later will no longer be a curse. It will simply be an old habit being replaced by a new way of living.